Hey, I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip. Life is beginning to return to normal on the COVID front, but we face another grave danger, this one on the political front. It's voter suppression and the efforts by many Republicans to make it harder for Democrats, and particularly people of color, to vote. We're going to tackle the issue with a great panel. Welcome to Let It Rip. Joe Biden is the President of the United States. Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. They won in a fair election, and there's no evidence, I'll say it again, no evidence that widespread voter fraud had anything to do with the outcome. These are facts. But on the heels of a big lie that the election was stolen from the former occupant of the White House, Republicans are all in on making it harder to vote, especially in the battleground states that decided the election. Let's crack open the issue. Here to help us out, we have a professor from Medgar Evers College, which is part of CUNY, Byron Price. The co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and director of the Kairos Center, Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, is also with us. New York civil rights attorney, Casilda Roper Simpson. And from Atlanta, the founder of the Organize to Mobilize movement, Antonio Lewis. Welcome to all of you. Let's start with you, Antonio. Georgia played a big role in the Biden-Harris win, and almost immediately, state lawmakers took action to make voting harder. They use the words secure and integrity when it comes to elections, but they offer no evidence there was ever a problem with election security. Now, in Atlanta, what are you seeing on the ground?
So securing was dog whistling. It was a message from our governor in his dog whistling ways. Here on the ground in Atlanta, we saw it coming. As you see, our mayor and governor, they were suing each other over opening the state. But what we did see also was that the losers got to make the rules. When I think about what happened on November 4th and on January 7th after the election, is that the governor, who was a part of the losing side, he went back and he changed the rules. We came out and they told us we had the most secure election in the history of Georgia. And then they changed every rule. And the rules that they changed, they were they were so implicit. They were so implicit that it's confusing us on when we can actually go and vote. Like, we know there's Sunday voting, but we don't know when, what Sundays. We know there's a Saturday voting, but we don't know when. The drop boxes, you can only do when you have your vote by mail, or if you want to drop off your ballot, you now have to go inside of the building, and you can only bring it when the building's open. What's the purpose of having a drop box, right?
Right. It certainly is an effort to retain power, even though in the minority. Reverend Theoharis, are you surprised by what's going on with Republicans in relation to voting rights?
Well, I mean, what we've seen over the past decades is that we have an all-out attack on voting rights. You know, we've now gone through 2 presidential elections, this one included, without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act, despite the fact that that people have died fighting for us to have those rights. And so, you know, when they gutted Shelby and gutted the voting, you know, when Shelby helped to gut the Voting Rights Act and that pre-clearance, you know, what we saw all across the country was 27 states enacted voter suppression laws, an all-out attack on this democracy, especially on poor people, on people of color. But it didn't work enough, right? You know, you had in the 2020 election, you had a very strong turnout of Black people, of Indigenous people, of poor people who were voting for candidates that were talking about issues like living wages and addressing systemic racism. You had, high voter turnout, despite the fact that it's harder and harder for people to actually exercise their right to the democratic process. And so it's not surprising. And until Congress reinstates pre-clearance and passes these kind of on a federal level, this voter protection, we're going to see more and more states, you know, using, as they found in the court in North Carolina, surgical racism to try to deny people their constitutionally given rights to elect leaders that represent and that speak and fight for the issues that impact the majority of people. And so it's not surprising, but it's awful. And that's why people are organizing from the bottom up to make sure that we save the soul of this democracy.
Mhm. Byron, the restrictions vary by state, but can include limiting the use of ballot drop boxes, adding identification requirements for voters requesting absentee ballots, and doing away with local laws that allow automatic registration for absentee voting. What do you make of all of that?
Well, to me, it's kind of funny because I think in this election, people of color beat them at their own game, because usually absentee balloting was mostly elderly whites would exercise that. And since they put up so much resistance toward voting, reducing polling booths, sort of like the long lines and so forth. So I think especially in Georgia and a lot of other places, they were very strategic. They said, well, utilize absentee balloting so you could you could bypass a lot of the sort of like barriers that have been put up in place to sort of access the franchise and to vote. So to me, it's not surprising as a Southern, as someone who sort of looked at voting. When you think about it, even New York, I was surprised to see that quote that you gave. New York has about 12 bills that are looking to restrict voting. So people of color has always been an effort to sort of disenfranchise people of color with respect to voting. So I think the Supreme Court, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of myself, but when you think about Shelby County and Holder, when they sort of gutted the Voting Rights Act, where these states who are known for discriminating no longer have to have pre-clearance by the federal government before they change laws.
Right, they took that away.
Yes, so yeah, they took that away. Now you have the John Lewis Act that's trying to reinstate that. It passed the House, but it hasn't passed the Senate yet. But I think to your question, Mike, I think it's not surprising to me because the Republicans always do that. And I don't think at any point in time has our country been founded on other people actually getting to participate in democracy and direct democracy. It's mostly, I think, for white males for the most part. And once the system doesn't favor them anymore, then you see all these laws come into place.
Casilda, let me hear from you on this. What do you think about all that?
People are paying attention. And, in a lot of states, we have the felony disenfranchisement. And now that you see that even those individuals who now have the rights to vote after being incarcerated are participating and agreeing with food insecurity. People are realizing that it's a trickle-down effect. And when the voter suppression is occurring, they're speaking to each other and educating and knowledge, and knowing that knowledge and information is power. They're giving each other that information and knowing that they have to stay vigilant. And those long lines, they're still saying, it's very clear that saying that the long lines aren't stopping us from coming out. So understanding that, the targets, the areas and people who are targeted for voter suppression are still coming out and still voting. So people are paying attention and making it very known to the politician and whoever are listening and watching that we're not going to allow our votes to be suppressed.
And just to stay on that, when you think about in Georgia, we learned the rules. We are the only state. There are two states in the country that have that instituted voter ID laws on their own, where the state Secretary of State actually created the voter ID law. The ID law we have in Georgia is where you have to. It's an automatic registration. Let me go back. Only two states in America that have automatic voter registration ID laws. And that's Georgia and Colorado. And never has a Southern state wanted to be on a list with Colorado for anything. Colorado is a true purple state. The folks they really vote their pocketbooks and their real thoughts. I was there in 2014, and I saw them reject all the federal candidates and keep the state candidates. And so in Georgia, we have this automatic voter registration where everybody's registered to vote. And you're automatically registered to vote when you get an ID, whether you're a felon, no matter what. So you don't have to do any other research. And so in Georgia, from here on out, it's a get out the vote effort. And I'm okay with that. That means that when we talk about from the grassroots up, from the ground up, the fight's on us. And so if we're going to be moving, the confusion part, which is what I talked about earlier, is that we don't know when the polls are open. And so
let me ask you another question, though, Antonio. Senator Raphael Warnock has called all of this Jim Crow 2.0. Is he right? Is he on the mark?
Yeah. So I talked about dog whistling a little earlier. And when you hear secure the vote in the same state that we have a Republican governor, Republican Secretary of State, and the previous Secretary of State was the current governor who changed all the rules. And so before he battled Stacey Abrams in the election, he changed every voting rule he could. And so we're actually living under his rules. We learned the rules, we learned the game, we beat them at it, and the very next day they changed the rules again. And this country has been built on like the losers framing what happened. And typically, if you lose a battle, you don't get to wake up in the morning and say, hey, this is what happened. You typically have to go with what really happened on paperwork. So typically, our governor, he shouldn't have had the opportunity to change all these laws under the most secure voting election we've ever had in our history.
Reverend, what do you think?
I think right now, the fact that we have these hundreds of bills in 47 states, and especially, as you said, in the states where we had high turnout of poor people and of people of color who put into office, folks that stood for healthcare, stood for, improving education, and so people across this country, whether you're in a state that is really trying to attack voting rights or not, we need vigilance right now, and we need organizing from the bottom up to make sure that this doesn't just happen, and that we act. I mean, this is a fight for our democracy. It's nothing less than that, because if you deny people and you keep people disorganized and unable to put people into office that then pass policies that impact people in a good way and not
get what we just had.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And we can see the impact of that, right? We can see the more poverty. We can see the public health crisis that we're living through. We can see the fact that folks are in the richest country in the world that throws away more food than it takes to feed everybody, how we have growing food lines, right? And that's a direct impact of the people that are in office and the policies that they pass when they're smuggled basically into office because of voter suppression. And then therefore, implement these policies that hurt everybody.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, some of the things that are happening right now are simply put appalling. Now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk a bit more about voter suppression. We'll look at people who have died to get the right to vote and what this all means going forward. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to Let It Rip. I'm Mike Gilliam. Voting rights are once again under attack, and Republicans are not even hiding the fact that they're working to steal elections, and that in their minds is okay. Take a look at this leaked video obtained by CNN's Chris Cuomo and his team. This is Jessica Anderson, the head of Heritage Action for America, talking about her organization ghostwriting Republican voter suppression laws.
Iowa was the first state that we got to work in, and we did it quickly and we did it quietly. Honestly, nobody noticed. Then we turned to Georgia. Woohoo! I was able to sit down with Governor Kemp 3 days before he signed the election package in Georgia, and I had one message for him. Do not wait to sign that bill. If you wait even an hour, you will look weak. It's the same message we're giving Governor Ducey here in Arizona, the governor of Texas, Governor DeSantis in Florida as well. We're working with these state legislators to make sure they have all of the information they need to draft the bills. In some cases, we actually draft them for them, or we have a sentinel on our behalf give them the model legislation. So it has that grassroots, from the bottom up type of vibe.
Casilda, given that concerted effort, what's the appropriate response?
The appropriate response is the legislators and our elected officials need to continue to stay vigilant and stay focused. The Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965 guaranteed and showed that Americans took the major steps then towards the inclusive democracy where all voices could and should be heard to shape the future. And our future didn't stop then, it continued. And in continuing that, we need to stay and make sure that the laws are passed. And a person like myself who's in the law have to make sure that the law are enforced and the laws continue to make sure that everyone have their rights to vote and not be suppressed. And unfortunately, it happens in certain community. And like, as we all are staying here, Black and brown people, people of color, and the disenfranchised. So we have to make sure that, you know, when I see that and I hear and the video that we all saw, it becomes problematic to know that the Constitution, where the 15th Amendment was covered in the Voting Rights Act, is a problem and it's violated.
Byron, kind of dovetailing on that, should the federal government actually handle this assault on voting rights? Is that where it needs to be handled? And can it be handled there?
Oh, absolutely. Because anytime, even when doing President Reagan, when he talked about devolution, revolution, when he ceded rights back to the states and states' rights, we know how states treat their citizens, especially people of color. So what I'm looking at, okay, so we have this Senate. So the bill, the John Lewis Act has been made it through the House. So what's going on with the Senate? We have 50-50 and the vice president would break the tie, but also they're sort of dilly-dallying around sort of a filibuster. So I think they should get rid of the filibuster because then they could implement President Biden's agenda. But I think the federal government has always come in when the states refuse to do what they want to do. Little Rock Central schools, Brown versus Board of Education. You think about I can enumerate lots of laws where the federal government has had to step in because the states refuse to allow us to have these inalienable rights that the Declaration of Independence say all men and women are created equal and have inalienable rights. So we can't really trust the states. And I don't think we really can trust the Republican Party to sort of take care and make democracy a idea for all people to participate in.
Well, it's not the first time that African Americans have been forced to fight to protect their right to vote. Many have died in the past. Here's a timeline on the struggle African Americans have waged to get and hold voting rights with a couple of notable events. Back in 1868, white men in Opelousas, Louisiana, killed about 250 mostly Black Americans to suppress Black turnout. In 1873, a mob of about 150 armed white men killed between 60 and 150 Blacks who had taken over a local courthouse, defending it from possible seizure following a controversial election. It indicated the lengths they would go to maintain authority. There was also the Wilmington Massacre with another 60 or so killed. And what's known as Bloody Sunday in 1965, 600 activists marching from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama to protest for Black voting rights, attacked by state troopers at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, among them the late Congressman John Lewis. So violence, bloodshed, and death, all a part of the struggle for voting rights. Now another attempt to roll it back. Too often the sacrifices are forgotten, right, Byron?
Absolutely. And I think as a Southerner, I'm from Memphis, and I received my PhD from Mississippi State. And I know the Medgar Evers family very well, his brother Charles Evers. And so it's not surprising to us as a Southerner, the sort of the efforts that they go to sort of disenfranchise the vote. Because we think about Mississippi with the massive resistance legislation that came forward to deprive people of the franchise. And so they were only sort of empowered in the 80s in Mississippi. In the 1980s when they could actually vote. And now you see all these laws coming back. So it's just, I think it's kind of funny that we sort of surprised that there's an assault on voting rights. It has never really stopped when you think about it. Mm-hmm. They continue to find ways to disenfranchise poor people and people of color. So it's not surprising to me, Mike. But the last thing I'll say is think about it. To steal a vote, the Trump administration dismantled the post office because they realized that absentee balloting was coming in favor of the Democrats. So we basically destroyed our postal system, which still is not really working. to sort of try to steal the vote. And it's really them, which is kind of ironic, is they're the ones who really sort of made the system of voting dysfunctional. Now they're trying to claim these things.
That it's insecure.
Yes.
Reverend Theo Harris, what do you think about that? All that death and sacrifice, and now they try to roll it back. Briefly.
I mean, this is why we have to continue to fight. People did not fight in vain for legislators to come through and rob people of these rights. And it is not in the interest of the powers that be to have people exercising their democratic rights. But it is in the interest of this democracy and of the people, right? We live in a nation that has 140 million people who are poor or low income. And what we've seen is a correlation between suppressing voting rights, taking people's voting rights away, and impoverishing communities. Putting into office, leaders, elected officials who pass policies that cut people off of healthcare, that make it impossible to raise wages, that defund our schools, all of these kinds of regressive policies, when instead what the vast majority of people in this country need and are demanding is a better life. And especially in this moment where we're living through a pandemic, an economic crisis, a racial reckoning, and when we see these very democratic rights and principles being attacked, what we know is that what we've heard, for instance, from our friends and colleagues in South Africa, is that a dying mule kicks the hardest. Right now, there are some folk that are kicking pretty hard.
Oh, yes, indeed. Okay.
But it's because of our power and because of the power of poor people and people of color to vote and put into office folks that actually can lift from the bottom.
Yeah, it reeks of desperation. Casilda, when you look at what's going on with all of this, how does it make you feel about these efforts to make it tougher to vote? And do you, in fact, think that this needs to happen at the federal level and the filibuster needs to go away? What do you think about that? And this will be the last word here.
But in terms of the federal level, yes, because it involves all the states. And I think I'm probably the only inner city person on this Zoom. And we have a lot of issues in the inner city. Some of the issues we have with our large buildings. And oftentimes if the polling site was in the building, all of a sudden they move it. So folks who were supposed to go vote in the building and they get ready to go vote and they say, oh, you're not here. And I've been voting since I was 18 and we had early voting. And when I went to my early voting site that they told me that I needed to go to on the card that they sent me in the mail, they said, oh, no, you're not here. Now, what if I was frustrated and didn't want to be bothered and went home?
Or what if your time ran out? I think in Georgia, they want you to do that by the time, by 5 o'clock or something like that, but they put time restrictions.
So the issues are there. So it should be on a federal level. And again, from my perspective as an attorney and one that's in the law, it's imperative that it be structured and stay within our system, our legal system, and the law be implemented to go straight across the board. In New York, recently, May 2021, our legislators had the absentee ballots. So you don't have to give a reason to have an absentee ballot, and you can register actually on the date of the election. So those are things,
positive things.
And those are the things that we need to have individuals do in their states, but we're doing it here. So if it came from a federal perspective, yes.
Okay, that's going to have to do it. I want to thank our guests who've all made some excellent points. Medgar Evers College professor, Byron Price, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Liz Theo Harris, New York civil rights attorney, Casilda Roper Simpson, and from Atlanta, the founder of Organize to Mobilize, Antonia Lewis. Thank you all. We're going to take a short break, and I'll be back with some final thoughts. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back. I'm Mike Gilliam, and this is Let It Rip. Voter suppression efforts are underway in 47 states with at least 361 bills up for consideration. That signals an all-out assault on voting rights that is of great concern for people of color. It appears that the Republican Party is looking to cut down on the number of people of color casting their ballots to win elections, rather than winning them fair and square by putting forth the best candidates and the ideas that would get people of color to vote for them as opposed to Democrats. That's a sad state of affairs that is not in the best interest of the country and democracy. And it certainly is not in the best interest of people of color. Because the effort is so widespread and organized and Republicans hold control of a number of state legislatures, the problem will not go away easily or on its own. Fair-minded people will have to be vigilant and work hard to make sure the voting rights that Black people died for are not just stripped away, allowing candidates who would do us harm to win elections. We'll be talking about this a lot in the future and drawing attention to efforts designed to deny people of color access to the ballot box. In the meantime, register and vote. Don't sit out the next election cycle because you see positive signs coming from the White House. Organize and gear up for the midterm elections. Control of the House and Senate are extremely important during a time when voting rights are under attack. I'm Mike Gilliam. We'll see you next time on Let It Rip.